The moment Marcus watched his daughter's face light up at the sight of the diner's menu, something most people wouldn't give a second glance, he felt his heart simultaneously soar and shatter. Sarah pressed her small nose against the laminated pages, her breath fogging the plastic as she whispered the names of dishes like they were exotic treasures: cheeseburger, chocolate milkshake, apple pie. At 7 years old, she understood more than any child should about going without, yet somehow maintained a capacity for joy that humbled him daily. Marcus blinked hard against the burning behind his eyes, his calloused fingers tightening around the $23 in his pocket, his last $23 until Friday's paycheck. This dinner out, their first in 8 months, was supposed to be a celebration of Sarah's birthday. But sitting there in his paint-stained work jeans, watching other families laugh without the weight of impossible choices crushing their shoulders, Marcus wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe they should have stayed home. Maybe he should have bought groceries instead. Maybe he was fooling himself that he could ever give his daughter the life she deserved. The Riverside Diner had seen better days, its red vinyl booths cracked and patched with duct tape, the checkered floor faded to a dingy gray. But to Sarah, it might as well have been a 5-star restaurant. She sat up straight, smoothing down her best dress, a hand-me-down from their neighbor that was still a size too big, and folded her hands on the table like she'd seen ladies do in the old movies they watched together on their ancient television. "Daddy, can I really order anything?" she asked, her brown eyes wide with cautious hope. Marcus swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded, forcing brightness into his voice. "Anything you want, princess. It's your special day." He'd already done the math 3 times in his head. If she ordered the kids' meal and he just got coffee, they'd have enough for a small slice of birthday cake to share. He wasn't hungry anyway, or at least, that's what he'd tell himself. Again, 2 booths over, Olivia Chen sat alone, her $1,000 silk blouse hidden beneath a borrowed cardigan, her designer handbag tucked out of sight under the table. At 32, she was the sole heir to the Chen technology fortune, worth an estimated $4.3 billion, though you wouldn't know it from looking at her in this moment. She'd been stopping at the Riverside Diner every Tuesday evening for the past 3 months, seeking anonymity in its humble walls, desperate for a few hours where people didn't recognize her name or want something from her. She'd been absently stirring her coffee when the father and daughter walked in, and something about them caught her attention. Perhaps it was the way the little girl's shoes, clearly too small, pinched her feet as she walked, or how the father's shoulders seemed to carry the weight of the world. Or maybe it was the fierce love that radiated between them, so palpable it made the air shimmer. Olivia found herself watching discreetly as they settled into their booth, as the girl's face transformed with wonder at the simple act of being in a restaurant, as the father's jaw tightened when he looked at the prices. "I'll have the grilled cheese, please," Sarah told the waitress, pronouncing each word carefully. And could I have a glass of milk?" The waitress, a grandmother named Betty who'd worked at the diner for 27 years, smiled warmly. "It's your birthday, sweetie. How about I bring you a chocolate chip cookie with a candle?" Sarah looked at her father, hope and fear warring in her expression, terrified he'd say no, terrified of asking for too much. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. Before he could speak, Betty patted Sarah's hand. "On the house, baby. Every birthday girl deserves a cookie." "Thank you," Sarah breathed, and Marcus mouthed his own grateful thanks to the waitress, his eyes suspiciously bright. Olivia's coffee had gone cold in her cup. She watched the father lean across the table to push a strand of hair behind his daughter's ear, watched him smile at her even though his own eyes held oceans of worry. She recognized something in that look, the fierce, protective love that her own father had shown before cancer took him 2 years ago, before she'd inherited an empire she'd never wanted, before loneliness had become her constant companion despite being surrounded by people who saw only her bank account. When Betty brought their food, Olivia noticed Marcus didn't order anything for himself. He insisted he'd eaten at work, though the way he watched his daughter eat suggested otherwise. Sarah seemed to notice too, because halfway through her sandwich, she carefully cut it in half and pushed the plate toward her father. "I'm really full, Daddy. Will you help me finish?" Marcus's eyes glistened. "Are you sure, princess?" We always share, remember?" It was such a small moment, witnessed only by scattered diners who barely looked up from their own meals. But to Olivia, it was profound. Here was a child who understood sacrifice, who'd learned to share not from having plenty but from having little. Here was a father who would go hungry to see his daughter smile. Here was more love in a split grilled cheese sandwich than in all the lavish galas and charity dinners she'd attended in her lifetime. She thought of her own life, the penthouse apartment she rarely slept in, the closet full of unworn clothes, the galas where she smiled for cameras while feeling utterly hollow inside. She thought of all the things money could buy and all the things it couldn't. She thought of her father's last words to her: money is a responsibility, live. Use it to matter. When had she last mattered to anyone? When had she last done something that wasn't calculated by publicists or approved by boards of directors? When had she last felt real? Betty delivered the promised cookie with a flickering candle, and the diner staff gathered to sing happy birthday off-key and enthusiastic. Sarah's face glowed brighter than the tiny flame as she closed her eyes to make a wish. Marcus looked at his daughter like she was the sun itself, his love so fierce and naked that Olivia had to look away, feeling like she was intruding on something sacred. When Betty brought the check, Marcus counted out his bills twice, his lips moving silently. Olivia saw him glance at the tip line, saw the conflict cross his face as he calculated whether he could leave anything extra for the kindness they'd been shown. She watched him write, "Thank you," on the receipt and leave $3 bills under his water glass, money he clearly needed himself. As they stood to leave, Sarah clutching a balloon Betty had found in the back, Marcus helped his daughter into a jacket with elbows worn thin. Olivia made her decision in an instant, her heart pounding with something she hadn't felt in months: purpose. "Excuse me," she said softly, approaching their booth. Up close, she could see the fatigue lines etched around Marcus's eyes, the frayed collar of his shirt, the pride in his posture despite everything. "I'm sorry to intrude, but I couldn't help noticing it's your birthday," she said to Sarah. "I'm Olivia. Would you mind if I gave you a birthday card?" Marcus stiffened slightly, his protective instincts flaring. "That's kind, but not necessary." "Please," Olivia interrupted gently. "It would mean a lot to me. My father passed away, and, well, I don't have family to celebrate with anymore. It would be an honor." Something in her voice, the genuine loneliness beneath her words, made Marcus nod slowly. Olivia pulled out a business card, not her Chen Technologies card, but the one for her private charitable foundation, and on the back, she wrote quickly before handing it to Sarah. "Happy birthday, Sarah. Stay wonderful." Sarah beamed. "Thank you, Miss Olivia." They left, Sarah skipping despite her too tight shoes, Marcus's arm around her shoulders. Olivia watched them disappear into the night, then quietly signaled Betty. "That family's bill, I'd like to cover it. And please keep the father's tip for yourself." Betty raised an eyebrow. "Already paid, hun. I know. This is separate." And Olivia pulled out her checkbook, writing quickly. "I'd like to establish a tab at this diner. For families like that. When you see someone who needs it, a parent going without so their child can eat, cover their meals. Bill it to this account. No questions, no announcements. Just kindness." Betty's eyes widened as she saw the amount. This is $5,000. Start with that. Call me when it runs low." "Who are you?" Betty whispered. "Just someone who needed a reminder about what matters," Olivia replied. But she wasn't done. That night, back in her penthouse, Olivia researched. She found Marcus Chen, no relation, in the building permit records. Marcus Turner, single father, worked construction, address in the subsidized housing on Elm Street. She found his story in gaps in records: his wife who died in childbirth with Sarah, his struggle to raise a daughter alone while working 2 jobs to make ends meet, his spotless record and reputation as a devoted father. The next day, she made calls. Not as Olivia Chen, billionaire heiress, but through carefully chosen intermediaries. Within a week, Marcus received a letter. His daughter had been selected for a full scholarship to Riverside Elementary's after-school arts program, something Sarah had mentioned wanting in an essay at school. A month later, an anonymous benefactor paid off the medical debt from his wife's hospital stay, the debt that had been crushing him for 7 years. By the end of the year, Marcus had received an unexpected promotion, his foreman mentioning that an impressed client had specifically requested him for a major project. A project that came with benefits, health insurance, and a salary that meant Sarah could have new shoes that fit, and Marcus could buy groceries without calculating every penny. Olivia never revealed herself. She didn't want gratitude or recognition. But she started visiting the Riverside Diner every Tuesday, watching as Betty used the account she'd established. A single mother and her 3 children. An elderly man who counted coins for his soup. A teenager saving tips from his dishwashing job to help his immigrant parents. One by one, their meals were covered, their burdens lightened just a little, their faith in human goodness restored. And Olivia, who'd once measured her worth in stock prices and property values, found something infinitely more valuable. The quiet joy of mattering to someone, of using her privilege to ease another's burden, of honoring her father's legacy not through boardroom decisions but through simple acts of human kindness. 3 years later, Sarah stood on stage at her middle school graduation, having won a scholarship to an elite preparatory academy. Marcus sat in the front row, wearing a suit he'd bought with honest wages, tears streaming down his face. Neither of them ever knew about the woman in the back row, dressed simply, clapping until her hands hurt, her own tears falling freely. Because that's what true kindness looks like, not grand gestures that demand recognition, but quiet acts that change lives without fanfare, that restore dignity instead of creating obligation, that remind us we're all connected in our humanity. Sometimes a stranger's compassion, a single moment of seeing and caring, can redirect the entire course of a life. And sometimes, the person whose life changes most isn't the one who receives the kindness, but the one who gives it.